Today's lesson is using architecture to beat the heat. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And today we're going to continue to talk about beating the heat to keep cool in the hot summer by not using your fan and your air conditioner. And we're learning from ancient cultures around the world. They knew a thing or two about keeping cool in the hot summer. After all, humans had to keep cool for thousands of years before air conditioning was invented just over 100 years ago.
That's right. And in the last lesson, we looked at people in North Africa and the Middle East and how they used wind catchers inside buildings, which were high towers, these wind catchers, to cool the space inside the buildings. And we also looked at some Indian architects and the techniques they used to cool buildings.
Exactly. So let's find out what the Romans did and what some Americans have been doing to keep things cool in the hot summer. Let's dive right in and talk about what the Romans did. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson.
The Romans also utilized the cooling power of water. They constructed great aqueducts to transport water into cities for use in public baths, toilets, and fountains. Wealthier Romans were able to cool their houses by pumping the cold, fresh water from the aqueducts through pipes in their walls before it reached its final destination. Though the poor couldn't afford this luxury, they benefited from the many water fountains in public spaces.
大家好，第一部分我们看到单字 utilize， 这个字是动词，意思是利用或是使用。例如 Dilbert utilized his expertise with coding to fix a glitch in the computer software. Dilbert 利用他在编码方面的专长，修好该电脑软体的一个错误。或是 The upcoming movie will utilize the most cutting-edge technology. 那部即将上映的电影将会使用最先进的科技。另外补充这个字的同义字 employ, E-M-P-L-O-Y, employ, 表示使用或是利用。举例来说Donald employs different methods to teach his students about history. Donald 使用不同的方式来教他学生历史。或者 The strategies he employed to increase factory production proved to be effective. 他用来增进工厂生产力的策略证实有效。接下来我们看到名词 luxury， 指奢侈品、奢侈或是奢华。像是The home was filled with luxuries like fancy carpets and door handles made of gold. 这个家里充满了奢侈品，像是华丽的地毯和精致的门把。或是 Ever since winning the lottery, Ted and Tina have been living a life of luxury. 自从中了乐透后 ，Ted 跟 Tina 过着奢华的生活。另外补充这个字的形容词 luxurious。L-U-X-U-R-I-O-U-S, luxurious, 意思是豪华的或是奢侈的。举例来说 Malcolm moved into a luxurious new apartment last year. Malcolm 去年搬进一间豪华的新公寓。或是 After a long week's work, Sarah treated herself to a luxurious day relaxing at the spa. 辛苦工作一周后 Sarah 犒赏自己在水疗馆放松度过奢侈的一天。
So there seems to be a common theme among all of these ancient techniques for keeping cool, and that theme is water, because the ancient Romans also used water to keep cool. Now it says here the Romans also utilized the cooling power of water. They constructed great aqueducts to transport water into cities for use in public baths, toilets, and fountains. So here in the first sentence, we have the word utilized. Utilized means more or less the same as to use. But when you utilize something, you're using it for a particular purpose. It sounds a little bit more technical than the verb to use.
Exactly. You're talking about using special techniques or minerals or machines or something to accomplish some sort of goal. So in this particular case, the Romans were able to use or utilize the cooling power of water. We touched on this a little bit last time. Of course, water can cool things by simply touching something, or when it evaporates, it also cools things off as well. So here is what the Romans did. They constructed great aqueducts to transport water into cities for use in public baths, toilets, and fountains. So, of course, in Rome, in ancient Rome, they had these aqueducts, and those, of course, are artificial structures that transport water from one place to another. They're similar to canals, but aqueducts usually are kind of elevated, and in this particular case, they transport water into cities for various uses. They can use them in public baths, so people can go to these places and take a bath. They can bathe and get themselves nice and clean, or they can go there to relieve themselves in toilets. And then, of course, water was used in fountains, which, of course, are very pretty. You've got water squirting up in the air, and a lot of times they come out of very fancy sculptures or statues.
Right, so these great aqueducts transported water. So here the verb transport means to move something or to move people from one place to another. So commercial airplanes can transport people from one country or one city to another. A truck can transport food or goods from one place to another to be sold. So these aqueducts transported water into cities because the source of the water was certainly not in the city. It was in the countryside, maybe many kilometers away. So they needed some kind of duct or some kind of path to transport this water. And this water, once it arrived in the cities, in ancient Rome, for instance, would be used in public baths. Now, in ancient Rome, people didn't have bathrooms in their homes. So in order to get clean, to wash themselves, or simply to relax, they would go to these public baths. And the water would also be used in toilets and fountains. So if you go to Italy, you'll definitely see a lot of fountains. A fountain is a structure often made of marble or some kind of stone through which a stream of water is pumped into the air. So it looks like the water is just flying into the air and then it falls down again. And Italy has many, many beautiful ancient fountains.
And wealthier Romans, rich Romans, were able to cool their houses by pumping the cold, fresh water from the aqueducts through pipes in their walls before it reached its final destination. So the water kind of took a detour from the aqueduct and went into wealthy Romans' homes, and the water would go through pipes in their walls. So with water there going next to their walls or through their walls, it would help cool down the house for those rich Romans.
Right. So the rich Romans were able to benefit from this passage of water. However, the poor, not so much. Though the poor couldn't afford this luxury, they benefited from the many water fountains in public spaces. So poor people couldn't afford this luxury. A luxury is something that usually costs a lot of money that you don't need. You want it because it's nice, but you don't actually need it. Like basic food, clothing, and housing and shelter are not considered luxuries. They're considered a necessity, whereas a sports car or expensive jewelry, these would be considered luxuries.
Right, so the rich people could afford this luxury, this special service, but poor people could still benefit from the many water fountains in public spaces. They just simply had to go there and share the space with other people. So here, of course, we've got the phrase to benefit from something. We also sometimes say benefit by, but here you could benefit from something. For example, your career could benefit from a summer internship where you can get some experience and later get an actual job. So indeed, the poor people could benefit from those many water fountains in public spaces. They could go down there to cool off during the hot summer. And I think I've seen scenes of kids in cities in the United States doing just that. They head down to local fountains like in New York and Philadelphia to cool off during the hot summer. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's talk about what they were doing in the southern United States.
American architecture has shown a similar concern with high temperatures. In southern states, large front porches were used to escape from indoor heat. The roof stretched out over the porch to provide ample shade. Traditional houses were frequently built with high ceilings, which allowed hot air to rise, and windows on both sides of the living space, which allowed the air to circulate.
第二部分我们看到单字 circulate， 这个字是动词，指循环、传播或是流传。例如 A strange smell circulated through the office. 办公室里传着一股怪味。或是 A new strain of the disease has started circulating. 这个疾病的一种新病株开始流传了。另外补充这个字的形容词 circular， C-I-R-C-U-L-A-R circular， 意思是环形的或是圆形的。像是 We followed a circular path around the mountain. 我们沿着一条环山的路径前进。也可以说 For this exercise, begin by swinging your arms forward in a circular motion. 这个运动一开始的动作是双臂向前画圆摆动。
So now we're going to move on to the United States. Now, American architecture has shown a similar concern with high temperatures. That isn't surprising because in certain parts of America, especially the Southwest, it can be very, very hot. It can get very hot because of the deserts there. Now, in southern states, large front porches were used to escape from indoor heat.
Okay, so we've got the word porch here. Of course, that's not really common here in Taiwan. At least I haven't seen it too much. A porch is an open area in front of a house. You can have chairs there. Usually people sit down and chat with their neighbors. And, of course, you can feel the cool summer breeze, and you're also in the shade there. But the unfortunate thing about porches is that you will be attacked by mosquitoes and flies and stuff like that. That's why a lot of porches have screens around them, and you can still feel cool and not be attacked by those nasty flies, especially those horse flies. They can be really wicked. So in any case, here in the southern United States, they had large front porches, and they were used to escape from the heat, which would happen inside a house because, as you know, sometimes if you don't have the AC on inside the house, it can feel hotter inside than it is outside.
That's right. But it can also feel hot out on the porch if it's really sunny. And what if it rains? So the porches in America, many of them are actually covered by a roof. The roof stretched out over the porch to provide ample shade. So we talked about shade before, which is an area that's covered from the sun. And these roofs over porches provide ample shade. So ample here means enough or more than you need.
It's sufficient shade, it's ample, more than enough, you could say. And traditional houses were frequently built with high ceilings, which allowed hot air to rise, and windows on both sides of the living space, which allowed the air to circulate. Okay, so again, we're talking about traditional houses in the southern United States and perhaps other parts of the country and the world for that matter. And they often had high ceilings. So, of course, if you're rich enough, you can afford a house with a high ceiling. And if you have that high ceiling, that means that the hot air will rise according to physics. So, as you know, hot air rises and cooler air sinks. So, if you have a high ceiling, then the chances are that the hot air will rise and you'll feel cooler when you're on the floor there.
That's right. So such a structure with high ceilings allow air to circulate. So to circulate means to move around continuously inside a room or a system or some kind of area. You could also say that traffic circulates across a city, around a city, through the many streets and roads.
Right. They just go through a system of roads in a city. Traffic circulates. Blood circulates through your body. And in this case, air will circulate inside a room in a house. That is, if you have windows on both sides of the living space. That's kind of hard to have sometimes in apartments when you have the windows facing only one direction. If you're lucky, you have windows facing maybe north and then west or something like that, or front and back, and you open the windows and then you can have good circulation. Circulation, of course, is the noun form of the verb to circulate. And so that's what they did in the United States, especially in the southern United States. And, of course, they had good air circulation there. They had big porches, high ceilings, and those things, of course, can result in having a cooler house during the summer. Okay, let's move on now to the final paragraph. We'll wrap things up, so let's listen.
For centuries, people have been coming up with creative ways to keep buildings cool. With the planet warming up and air conditioners actively contributing to global warming, perhaps it is time to revisit the techniques used in traditional architecture. Doing so might allow us to be less reliant on the energy-intensive cooling systems that we currently use.
最后第三部分，我们看到单字 intensive， 这个字是形容词，指密集的或是集中的、加强的。举例来说 ，Candidates must attend an intensive training program。应试者必须参加一个密集训练计划。也可以说 ，The authorities launched an intensive investigation into the cause of the plane crash。官方启动密切调查，了解这起飞机失事的肇因。另外，补充这个字的名词 intensity，intensity，intensity，意思是强度或是强烈。例如 ，Peter could see the intensity of the forest fire as it lit up the night sky。Peter 可以看到强烈的森林大火照耀在夜空上。或是I had to look away due to the intensity of the light. 由于光线强烈，我必须转移视线。
So now we're going to conclude our discussion on using architecture to beat the heat. So for centuries, people have been coming up with creative ways to keep buildings cool. Indeed, we have been looking at ancient civilizations and how these people have been coming up with ways to keep cool. So to come up with means to think of something, to think of an idea, such as an idea or a plan to create something or to solve a problem.
Right, so maybe your company is losing money and it's going bankrupt, so you need to come up with a plan to save your company before it goes under. So here, of course, people don't like it when it's hot. You know, being hot is uncomfortable and you sweat a lot and you smell bad. So, of course, nobody wants to be hot during the summer. So you need to come up with ways to keep cool. And indeed, in the past, they came up with creative ways to keep cool. And the examples we mentioned, of course, are just scratching the surface. There are many other ways to keep buildings cool as well. With the planet warming up and air conditioners actively contributing to global warming, perhaps it is time to revisit the techniques used in traditional architecture. So, with the planet warming up, we start this sentence with the word with. So because the planet is warming up, because we have this situation, and because people are using air conditioners and they use a lot of energy, and you have to use a lot of fossil fuels to provide that energy, which pollute the atmosphere and things like that. So indeed, because the planet is warming up, air conditioners contribute to global warming, we need to figure out ways to keep houses cool and buildings cool as well. So here we've got the verb phrase to contribute contribute to, that means to help something happen, to bring it about. So yes, indeed, burning fossil fuels contributes to global warming. It makes it worse.
That's right. I could also say smoking cigarettes contributes to bad health or perhaps even lung cancer. In other words, it's not the only cause of lung cancer, but it definitely contributes to the possibility of getting this disease.
Right. So because we have the planet warming up and air conditioners causing problems, maybe it's time to revisit these old techniques. If you revisit something, you go there again, but in this particular case, it means you actually look at something that was used before and reconsider it. You think that you might use it again. So, yeah, if we want to use air conditioning less, maybe we could consider using some of these old techniques.
That's right. And the next and last sentence says, doing so might allow us to be less reliant on the energy-intensive cooling systems that we currently use. So doing so means revisiting these techniques. By revisiting these techniques, we can be less reliant on the energy-intensive cooling systems that we use. To be reliant means to rely on, to depend on.
Right, so here we've got intensive with energy, energy intensive, which refers to air conditioners. They use lots of energy, or data centers are energy intensive. We need to have places that store all our YouTube videos and our games and stuff like that because they're so important. And these data centers are energy intensive, as are the data centers for cryptocurrencies. They also are energy intensive. And you could also refer to certain types of industries as labor-intensive, like manufacturing, for example. They require lots of labor, so they're labor-intensive. But in this case, we're talking about energy-intensive cooling systems that we currently use, which include mostly air conditioning. Yes, we should seek some alternatives to that. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's listen now to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分提到，罗马人建造了巨大的渡槽，将水运送到城市，然后怎么样。那这篇文中它用到动词 construct 来表达建造，然后还用到动词 transport 来表达运送、运输。那我们来学习它们的字根哦。好，首先看到 struct 这个字根呢，它就有pile 或者是 build 的意思，去表达堆叠啊，或者是建造。像 structure 这个字呢，它就是由 struct 来表达建造，然后后面加上名词字尾 ure 结合而来的 structure 就可以表达结构啊、构造体、建筑物等等。好，那在 construct 这个字当中，它的字首 con 表示一起， struct 表示建造，合在一起 construct 就是建造建构哦。好，那我们顺便补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 instruct。好，我们看到它的字首 in 表示在点点点上方， struct 表示建造。那我们试着想咯，人家在执行建造工程的时候呢，有人在上面指挥，上方有人在指挥，用这样的画面或是方式去联想到说 instruct 它有指导、指挥的意思。第二个补充的是 obstruct， 它的字首 ob 表示妨碍，那么 struct 表示建造，合在一起 obstruct 它就有阻止啊、妨碍或者是挡住、堵塞的意思。那么第三个补充的是 destruction， 它的字首 de 表示去除啊或者是否定， struct 表示建造，那么 ion 是名词字尾。当我们把某个构造建筑物把它除掉，那就表示要把它破坏掉嘛，所以 destruction 它就有毁灭、破坏的意思咯。好，那接着来看到 transport 当中的这个 port， 它当名词有港口的意思，那么它当字根呢，则表示运送、携带或者是有支撑的意思。那带有这个字根呢，多半就有输送往来的语义。好，我们看到在 transport 这个字当中呢，它的字首 trans 这个部分表示跨越或是横越，那么字根 port 表示运送， 当我们去横越不同地方，把物品往返运送到不同地方，这样应该很容易联想到 transport， 它有运送、输送的意思。然后我们在后面加上名词字尾 ation， 会变成名词 transportation， 那就表示运输系统啊，或者是交通工具。好，我们再顺便补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 import， 它的字首 im 是来自 in， 只是因为 in 它碰到了 bmp 开头的字根就拼成了 im， 那这个字首它表示往内。port 字根的部分表示运送，那往内运送应该会联想到这个 import， 它有进口啊、输入或是引进的意思。那现在如果把字首 im 改成 ex 表示向外嘛，那就会得到 export 这个字，那向外运送就可以联想到它有出口啊、输出或者是外销的意思。再来补充 deport 这个字，它的字首 de 表示离开或是远离，那么 port 表示运送，那把人家送走、送远离，那应该不难联想到 deport 它就有驱逐啊、遣返或是遣送出境的意思咯。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Construct. The city plans to construct a new bridge over the river.Transport. The fruits and vegetables were transported by a truck. Fountain. If you toss a coin into the fountain, you can make a wish. Luxury. An overseas trip is a luxury that I can't afford right now. Circulate. The smell of cooking meat circulated throughout the entire house. Intensive. You'll be sent on an intensive training course before you start
work.Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, if you were to design a house, what would you do to provide passive cooling?
If I were to design a passively cooled house, I would use marble for the floor and also thick marble for the walls because marble is cool, it's very cold, and that would keep the environment inside cool as well.
Well, if I were to design a house with passive cooling, I'd make sure it had good air circulation. I would build a house or buy a house that had windows on all sides of a room. And I would also not rely on the air conditioner so much. It's pretty good for the body to let yourself feel hot during the hot summer sometimes. What's wrong with a little sweat from time to time? Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.